Thank you, Carol. Carol's our overlord. That's recording this meeting, and she's going to be passing different presentations to us so that we can see them locally. But I'm Kyle Hauger. I work for Metro in the travel forecasting group, and I am one of 3 people on the OMUG coordinating committee. If you haven't been to this meeting before, OMUG stands for Oregon Modeling User Group, and we're a collection of public and private modelers, data scientists, geographers, folks that use transportation analytics for transportation planning purposes. We're not a political group, but we do dive deep into data sets, and we do simulation and forecasting for the public and private good. With that in mind, I want to acknowledge Tara is in the room. Tara Widener is also on the coordinating committee with OMUG. And Li Ming is not able to make this meeting, but he is kind of our academic PSU arm of the coordinating committee within OMUG. He's a professor at PSU. And so he helps us coordinate events for OMUG as well. So those are the sort of introductions and the purpose and the intent of this meeting and our group. What we usually like to do is just do a quick roundtable, and we'll also go online here for the folks that have dialed in, and just a real quick introduction of who you are and who you work for, or if you're a student, that's fine too. So maybe I'll start over here with Mark.
Mark Harrington. I work for the Regional Transportation Council in Vancouver, Washington.
Over here.
Wander. I'm with Moonshadow. I'm Amar. I don't know how we're going.
Yeah, I know. Kind of a weird layout.
I'm Amar. I'm also with Moonshadow. We're based in Eugene, and Mark uses our technology together with Amanda, and they'll be showing that this morning.
Elliot Rose, Metro, here to present today on Chris Johnson's behalf, who can't make it. Sends his regards.
Amanda Deering, DJS Associates.
Ben Stabler, RSG.
Julia Sosnowski, Washington County.
Josie Kosner, Transport Foundry. Tara Widener, ODOT and Salem.
Josh Roll, ODOT Research. ISG. Ali Jahanezov, ODOT.
Kyle Bright with David Evans and Associates.
Chima with ODOT.
Okay, out of fear of everybody introducing themselves all at once, that have dialed into this meeting, let's do the ODOT contingent down in Salem. I know there's got to be a bunch of you guys. Maybe start with you guys down there at ODOT in Salem.
This is Brian. I'm with ODOT here.
Chris Wright, Transportation Data Section, ODOT.
Alex Bernardi, ODOT.
Is that it, Brian, done in Salem? As far as you know?
Yeah, I think there's a couple people out of the office, so.
Okay.
Probably
okay. Anybody from Portland dialing in? Or others, just jump in, please.
Hi, this is Aaron Tonys from Good Company.
Garth Aponitis from DKS Associates.
Eric Main, Oregon Health Authority.
Doc Rosenthal, DKS Associates.
Camila Bucher, DKS Associates.
Okay, well, I think that's everybody. We have a nice showing today. This is a topic that we are certainly excited about, and for some of us, frankly, it's the first time we're seeing it. And we have a couple of different presentations today. We're scheduled to go until noon. Typically, these meetings don't last quite that long, but we'll see. This is an update on synthetic data applications. So we have a presentation today from Portland Metro and use case there, and as well as from RTC in Vancouver, Washington. And so we're pretty excited about the possibilities of these kinds of data entering into our workflow and into our stream of simulation and modeling. So with that, let me introduce Mark Harrington. Mark's been with he's been a transportation modeler in Oregon and Southwest Washington for over 20 years. The last 18 of which at Southwest Regional Transportation Council, the MPO for Clark County, Washington. Mark?
So, do we want to switch this over?
I think Carol needs to. Let's see, Carol.
Yes, I did. I passed the presenter control to the moonshadow bullet.
Oh, we're going to go here to local in.
What are you logged in at?
The key is logged in at ODOT's terminal here. That's where we're going to start.
I think that's this one.
Isn't it it's the one on the left. Yeah.
Got it.
This is the one, right? This is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cut the lights.
I guess I'll ask, since I can't see online.
Do you have, up at the top of the screen, do you have the little ellipsis, the dot, dot, dot? You can press that and just request the presenter control.
The dot, dot, dot. Okay.
Yeah.
Request mouse control or present. Let me share my screen.
Yep, you got it. Okay, you're up.
Okay. Here I go. Maybe I can. Does everyone see that?
We do.
We have a black screen. We have a black screen, so you need to share your screen. So up at the top there will be a little monitor icon. You need to select that.
Say share.
Click on share.
Or click on the screen first.
Choose
Your entire screen. You.
Just click on that.
Yeah. Now you got it.
Yep, you got it.
All right. So, further
Vander, can you send the meeting in?
So this is my first time presenting from a go-to meeting. I've attended many, but never done the presentation side of it. So we're learning. So thanks, Kyle, for that introduction. I'm here briefly thanks for the opportunity to talk about RTC's experience with INRIX trips on Moonshadow's DB4 IoT platform. I can thank Amanda here in the office, who's done most of the heavy lifting with it so far. Amanda with DKS, and DKS has been the prime consultant on this particular piece of work here for RTC, and we're grateful for the efforts that they put in. Also, I have with me here today both Aymar and Vonner Bushes,
right,
from Moonshadow Mobile. They are the developers of the DB4 IoT platform that we use, and during our time initiating this study, there's been some advancements and new features within the platform that have made some things that we were doing much simpler and better. And so we're going to give some time to them at the end to show some things that were accomplished there. So I guess moving on here, just sort of an overview of, find the right down, there we go. Presentation here. We're going to look at some background and purpose for the study, the data options that were available, sort of our criteria and selection process, look at the platform itself, the DB4 IoT platform, as well as some of the data analysis that was done, take some questions, and turn some time over to both Imar and Vonner to do a little demo of some of these new features that we utilize in this process. So first of all, some background for what we were doing here. The main impetus for the O&D study work that we were doing was for an urban freeway corridors operation study in Clark County, looking at both the I-5 and 205 within Clark County, as well as SR-14 and SR-500. It was looking at near-term, low-cost strategies to address freeway operations, looking at active traffic management, such as adaptive ramp metering, queue warning systems, variable speed, travel information, and so forth, as well as some operational changes like restriping, part-time shoulder use, lane assignment, and possibly some auxiliary lanes. You can kind of think of this as like the CBOS study for ODOT being done in Clark County. And so that was sort of the impetus for the study, is some data needs for that study. So the purpose of the O&D study was mainly to help provide data for that UFCO study, to look at patterns of access to and from the freeway system was the main effort there. If possible, we wanted to look at O&D patterns across the entire county, and as well as much flexibility for applications to general planning, as well as other corridor studies and possible some model-related elements in the future. And so we started with our heavy criteria for use in the UFCO study, and then see what else we could possibly get from the data. So for O&D data options, we looked at a wide range. We could look at manual field collection using Bluetooth, or we could go really old school and do some license plate video matching, but we really weren't too hip on that one. Probe data, third-party big data sets, things like AirSage, INRIX, and DB4 IoT, some streetlight, Terra Analytics were things that were potentials there. We even consider the ideas of mixing big data with some field-collected data as well. So as far as data criteria, these kind of go in order of what was critical down to less so. Critical, we were looking at the spatial resolution of the data. Since we were looking at freeway operations, we need to have some pretty fine detail there. The temporal resolution, both by hour and within the day, as well as day of the week, so we can look at weekend versus weekday. Additionally, important was sample size, have enough samples for what our interests were. Have some travel time information, and have bolded here routing details that tend to be a real big tipping point for our selection, our final selection. We wanted to be able to see routing, particularly from ramp to ramp along the freeway system. Additionally, we were interested in having some trip distance information, trip purpose if possible, looking at the data range, so how many years or how big a data set was available. Questions about mode potentially, as well as demographics were things we considered. On the logistical side, we wanted to understand format, interface, sort of schedule and cost, given we had a sort of tight schedule for collecting this data and its use, more of a funding schedule that we had to meet for that. And like I said, routing was a key part of the decision here. We did go with Moon Shadow Mobile's DB4 IoT with INRIX trips, and it was the strength of the routing analysis capability that led us in that direction, as well as having full coverage for the entire county, which would give us flexibility in looking not just within the freeway corridors, but looking at county O&D patterns, as well as use within other potential studies and use by our member agencies as well. So what is Moon Shadow Mobile's DB4 IoT platform? It's a web-based data analysis tool. And the data that is fed to that is GPS data from INRIX. Now this GPS data has been completely stripped of any identifying information. Each trip record has its own identification number. And the origin and destination location information, the XYs, are also anonymized, slightly, specified, so you don't have the exact start and stop location for each trip, but the waypoints are exact XY locations. We acquired 13 months of data, all of 2018, as well as the first month, January of 2019 as well. Within that data set reside 5 million total trips that either begin and end within Clark County, begin outside and travel to Clark County, begin in Clark County and travel outside of Clark County, or even pass through Clark County on the network of on Clark County's network. And so that's the universe of trips that were in this database. And with it, there's about 1 billion waypoints of information. The trips span from up into out of Vancouver, BC, down into California. We see some truck travel that length, as well as trips getting as far as Utah and northern Idaho and Montana. And so a pretty broad geographic coverage as far as where truck trips were able to see them go to. Database size, I think with trajectories in it, is around 170 gigabytes, and that resides on a Moonshadow server, and the DB4 IoT interface is accessed through a web browser. And so the server does all the heavy lifting. And so also within this database, I have here the share of trip observations. So 40% of the trips that observed are passenger or light vehicles, 27% are medium truck, and about 33% are heavy truck. And just for a general sense of things, for light-duty vehicles, 68% of those trips are within Clark County. 5% of them go completely through, and 27% would be internal-external trips from into or out of Clark County. For the medium and heavy-duty trucks, 33% travel through the county without a stop. 30% stay within the county themselves, and 37% are internal-external trips. Let's see. So data elements that are available within this data set, I guess as we said, there's the O&D coordinates for the beginning and ending of each trip. These aren't the exact XYs. They are anonymized through moving their location around. The O and the D are established by the ignition of the vehicle and turning off the vehicle, or have the vehicle not moving, or within a certain amount of distance within a certain amount of time. And if you have specific questions about that, I'll let Imar answer that question. But so if a car has been sitting for some amount of time, even though it's been running, it can have a start location. There are geographies that are available. We can look at state. These are county, zip code. We've supplied TAZ data as well as some district data. There's the ability on the fly to create user-defined small geographies in creating the data. Each element has date, the time, we have distance, speed, travel time, vehicle class, and heading. And there's some other bits of data as well. Notice there's no trip purpose within this. These are only vehicles, so walk trips, unless they're carrying a INRIX-enabled bit of device on themselves, that's not going to be recorded. There are some things you'll find in here. There are few in number, but you can look at the data and see occasionally an airplane flight path, boats on the Columbia or the Willamette River, but they're not large in number. But there are elements like that do exist in the data. And I know this particular session of OMUG was entitled Synthetic Data. This data is not synthetic at all. This is all complete, raw GPS waypoint data from INRIX, just pure observations. So from that data within the DB4 IoT platform, there are many different ways that it can be analyzed. One is sort of this area OD analysis. between, say, county to county, zip code area to zip code area. We could use TAZs. So essentially any type of polygon you could define, we can look at some type of OD information. That can be done as a map, choropleth map type. There are chord charts for looking at matrices flows between areas, as well as the ability to export those matrices to be used in spreadsheets or databases. There's also the ability to do, oh wait, I'm going to back up. So this is a hyperlink to a web-based interactive OD tool that DKS is working with us on. We started here with like 60 districts for the region. So when we zoom out, we could zoom out, we could see 60 dots on the map representing various areas. When we hover over one, we can look at flows between districts here. 60 is a lot for this, and so we're looking to pare it down to look at a much smaller number. This is sort of outside of the DB4 IoT platform. This is, we're looking at just for a method for reporting and for both our member agencies as well as some of our policymakers to be able to interact and look at the data. So this is sort of a fixed geography and then reading into various OD tables set for. This is a typical weekday pattern. We could look for weekday, weekends, AM peak, PM peak. We could look at, potentially look at truck movements as well within this interface here. So this is, we've taken data from the Moonshadow platform and developing a tool to use as far as reporting. All right. Link analysis. Now this is an aspect of this that was of great interest to us. That not only can we look between a movement between polygons, but had the ability to select a segment or any bit of a network. And in this instance here, this is some link OD analysis to look at diversion of I-5 South in the AM peak to head onto Main Street and through downtown Vancouver. This here, between 6 and 8 a.m., roughly 35% of the I-5 southbound traffic that exits at Main Street, so the yellow arrow there, is still bound for the interstate bridge. And they return back to I-5 at the 39th Street on-ramp, the 4th plane on-ramp, as well as the Mill plane on-ramp. Now, what really helped us here was for policymakers as well as for the engineering group that's looking at strategies and solutions for the operational issues here, was to really see and in some ways quantify the amount of diversion that is occurring here in the morning. And they would be able to make a better case for, there's only one ramp meter in all of Clark County right now, and it is from SR14 and so down at SR14 and out of the city center heading south in the morning, there's one ramp meter. This could definitely indicate using ramp meters at other locations at Mill Plane, 4th Plane, and 39th on-ramps could help mitigate the amount of diversion as there would be another additional time penalty for returning back to the interstate system. But those are things that are helping the analysis here. We can also combine area and link OD analysis. Here are two maps looking at the distribution of trips coming out of the central Clark County area that use the I-5 bridge and where their destinations in Oregon. And similarly, we can look at the other side from the same area, central Clark County, and use a 205 bridge and where are their destinations within Oregon as well. And so, being able to link both the polygons and the links in the OND made this a powerful tool. for us moving forward. Applications that were made in the USCO study, particular interest was the freeway ramp-to-ramp O&D traversal matrices by time of day and vehicle class to analyze sort of weave and merge between ramps. They also were used for the review locations with speed differentials and to look for locations of possible diversion to the local system. That bottom piece of graphic, that's the AM speeds in the morning. We can definitely see the slowdown coming westbound on SR14, that loop ramp that appears, and the friction that we see particularly in the leftmost lanes of the southbound traffic and the impact of that merge there. So these are some details that we could see within speeds, look at the length of queues, as well as some impacts of speed differentials between lanes on the system itself. So we found that the DB4 IoT platform provided an interface to explore and visualize a really large data set. And we're going to still do some more exploration within that. There's a lot of data that and information that can be mined. We found particularly useful during the USCO study, there was a workshop to discuss and brainstorm strategies and approaches to dealing with operational issues that exist on the freeway system within Clark County. And the tool provided a real-time ability to query and ask questions about, hey, we think this is happening. What can this tell us? And that was quite valuable during that, we had about a 6-hour workshop time, and engineers were able to ask questions and things that they thought were happening. They could either confirm it and get something quantitative there, or the ability to say, yeah, that's actually not happening, and sometimes it would lead to additional questions to be asked. So I can take any questions that you have, and I want to leave some time at the end of this for Einar to talk about some of the new changes or features within Moonshadow DB4 IoT platform that were beneficial to this project that we were working on. And we used to, I guess, to select a link, you'd have to draw let's back up here. Like the big loop ramp there on SR14, if I want to track those particular trips, you would draw a polygon around it, and it would select those trips, and then you could trace them. But if a vehicle didn't have to drop a waypoint on that ramp, even though it used it, you wouldn't get it. They've now done some work so we can actually trace trajectories and paths on links, and so those trips are actually assigned to a link, whether or not it dropped a waypoint there, which is up the sample rate when doing short link type of analysis, and overall made it much easier to look at paths that are traveled, as well as, I guess, one here, this picture, a selection of this link, and you can look at the distribution of trips from there and a percentage of trips where they're going to, as well as developing traversal matrices for ramp-to-ramp movements in a freeway system. So with that, I'll take any questions that you have, and then I'll turn some time over to Einar. I'll go with Kyle.
Kyle with Portland Metro. I'm wondering about how you're using this data with your models. So your link OD analysis and your traversal matrices. Those are things typically that in the past we've used to base your models for. Have you gone back and I guess I want to say validated this against your model, but maybe just kind of screen your model base year against this data to see how well it's performing?
We have not done that work. That's something I'm looking forward to doing, is to, typically we've used models to estimate traversal matrices. And I think what we've seen with, I guess, some potential weakness in using some regional models for that, the I-5 diversion in the morning is not something our regional model captures, that type of movement. And so being able to look at this, I think it brought some greater confidence within this UFCO study to really look at those ramp-to-ramp movements and these operational things that we don't necessarily pick up in a 1 hour static assignment in a regional model. But as far as being able to look at just maybe a select zone and looking at distributions, and even taking trip tables that we have and just looking at sort of all-day trip distribution, vehicular trip distribution, and sort of viewing it against this to see how well they match up, that's some work that we would like to be doing in terms of that sort of that flexibility moving forward to see this data and how it matches up with either validating the models or what kind of differences we have and potentially why.
And one of the projects with DKS in the past is we've taken data from observed data and taken data from models, imported it for IoT and compared it there. So we can go both ways. So.
Curious what the cost was for you guys to get access to the platform, how long it took for you, for Moonshadow, to get things ready for you. And then a couple more questions about the validation and the representativeness of the 5 million trips. I mean, from your, and like, how many millions of trips daily does your model estimate? Just to give you a comparison of the trips that the 5 million that are used. So cost, time for getting things operational, and then thinking about the representativeness of the data that you're using in the platform.
Well, I wish I could speak directly to cost. I don't have.
I have the numbers if you want.
Ballpark.
So 1 year of data, the way that INRIX prices their data is they price it based on the size of the area, the number of people in the area, and the time length of the data. So this was 1 year of data for Clark County. So they would usually, for a year of access with DB for IoT, that would be about $160,000. And Clark County, RTC in this case, license the data for a single use, and you only pay half. So $80,000 for the corridor study, a year of access to the tool, and a year of data. So is that a good ballpark? So
80,000.
Yeah, 80,000 for this study. Usually it would be double if you want to, and if it's double, then any agency could do any analysis using that data for any purpose. So
double would be unlimited use.
Yeah, unlimited use, and from the DB for IoT, from our perspective, we keep the systems running, and so we give RTC has a year of access to this data set. So.
If it's a quarter million, do you anticipate that the cost would be
not quite. I'd have to look at it. So, and the funny thing is, you actually double up, right? Because there's trips crossing the bridge, and you get them twice. You see what I'm saying? So, yeah.
And you asked about.
We own the data. I mean, are working with the data. You don't actually. I mean, you're working through a tool, but the data resides.
The data resides on our servers. You can download the data, and you can download any tables and aggregate information. So, as a customer, you own that data, and you can download it. But it's 1 billion records. So, it's a little bit of work. So, does that make sense?
And I would say, given the size of that database, if you want to just like take the data and figure out how you'd like to, the platform kind of makes the data. Without the platform, you got to develop your own platform and ability to query and work with that size of a data set, which is quite difficult. In terms of timing, I think we're on the order of weeks from the time we said we would like to we do the data. There is some processing of the data, so we were to provide the TAZ system for the entire region, as well as a districting system as well. And so aside from just having what's already known as far as some census geographies, zip codes, we could provide additional geographies that could flag the waypoints as well as the origin destinations with a particular geography as well. So that would facilitate quick, much faster querying of the data.
Yeah, it's usually 2 to 3 weeks for us to bring it up to. INRIX needs to export the data, they provide it to us, we bring it up in the system, we enrich the data, and so it's usually 2 to 3 weeks. So we can go faster if the data set is not too small. So.
Kyle, this is, sorry, this is.
So you have 5 million trips. I mean, again, back to the question of validating this model.
Hang on a second. Yeah, Carol?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we can hear Mark, and I Mark just fine, but some of the questions we're not able to hear, so other people around the table, if you could speak up, that would be great.
I'll repeat questions then. So there was a question regarding cost and timing, and I think that was what we first started with, and now we're on to a question regarding data validity, and I'll hear the rest of it.
Yeah, so
great.
I got checked. Did you do or work through trying to understand how representative it is? 5 million trips doesn't seem like a lot for a region of 500,000 or a county of 500,000. The passenger trip split, only 40%. I mean, obviously a lot of INRIX data is a freight component. Just trying to think about how that influences the outcomes of what the platform is telling you.
So we, that's something that I've thought about a lot, and I think we're going to continue to. So the question was, given it's 5 million trips, but we're in millions of trips per day. So, like, what's the sample size? And I guess I bring this back to it's a year's worth of data, and particularly we're looking at ramp-to-ramp traversal matrices. I'm saying, well, how many samples do we have for that ramp? That was a big consideration. Do we have enough samples on that? And it goes back to how would we typically do this? Maybe we would use, you'd put a Bluetooth sampler out there, right? And what's the sample rate for the day for the Bluetooth? It's around 10-ish%. And so how many samples would we get in a day versus in a normal type of workflow? And then what would this big data set provide us? It doesn't get that number of samples in a day, but we're looking over the course of a year, how many samples are we collecting? So we were so much interested in the sample rate over a set period of time, but did we get enough of a sample size to have some sort of confidence with that? So that's how it's been in terms of looking at ramp to ramp. They were looking at, do we have enough sample? If we got 10 trips, do I want to talk about trip, just, we got out of the sample, can we say what ramps are they going to with any confidence? So I think DKS put some sort of minimal number of samples on ramps when they were looking at that information. So maybe looking at just 1 hour is not going to work. You have to look at an AM peak period as opposed to an AM peak hour, or you could look at a 15-minute time period at a particular ramp, but maybe 15 minutes for a segment of freeway is different just because you have more samples. And how well is it distributed or representative of, say, the universe? Because, as you said, it's pretty good with trucks. We get only 40% of the samples are in passenger light-duty vehicles. I asked one time ago, was there a lot of duplicate, the same person making the same trip? And I'm still working with thoughts about how to sort of evaluate that in a different way. I think it was more just, is it distributed across the population? How evenly is it distributed across the population? And what we don't have is any information about who's making that trip. And that trip might have an origin in a particular place, but that's just where the trip started. It doesn't say that they lived where they started. So I've considered looking at, within either our zone system, some districting system, how many total samples there are by district within the county, and look back at that against land use and say, are there places that are underrepresented in terms of sample size? And is there inherent, is that in low-income areas or other areas that might have that type of bias in with that? But, the same type of thing goes if we can take a Bluetooth sample and say, well, we have no information about is that representative of the people making the trips as well. And so I'm sort of inherent in this big capture of data. Is there sampling bias? And I think it'd say there is some amount of sampling bias. How much and how much of a difference does it make? I think those are still questions that we're asking. But I think when we were making our comparison different ways we could go about doing this, we didn't see that this sample was going to be any more biased than any other sample of OD data that we could have access to. And
so one of the things that really interests us as a developer, and also to address the point that you're raising, is if we would have measurements with vehicle length over the year in 15-minute increments, we could combine that with the data from INRIX, and we could actually show you what the sample size is at each point in time over the year. I think that would be very interesting to get a much better idea. INRIX says it's usually for passenger vehicles, it's usually 3 to 5%. For trucks, it's more in the 8 to 12% range. But there's big differences geographically, and there's even big differences over time within the same geography. So we'd be very interested in combining the INRIX data, with other measurement data to get a better understanding of this for the purposes of the analyses. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Could you expand this data set based on different vehicle classification counts?
Yeah, so
so hold on. The question was from Kyle. Could you expand the data set? This is for those online, based off of vehicle classification counts. I think that's kind of where you're headed. Yeah. And I think that would be the main approach to this, would be to use count observations, and this would be a way to expand that data and look at trip distribution. This is more, you can get percentage trip distributions, but we'd have to have actual count information to get to that. And so this is what I said. This data set doesn't try to synthetically represent the world. It's a sample from which we can, make some extrapolations from.
Mark, the platform has a lot of functionality, right? So a lot of the value is in the platform, right? The ability to query different types of things, time of day, and classify things. But you can also download data sets, right? As you were saying, right? You don't want necessarily the whole raw data set, but after you queried a link and you could generate an OD matrix or something. And then you could use that for validation purposes or whatever else, right? So I'm always trying to separate, how much value is in the interactive platform tool and how much value is in a couple of key queries or pieces of information. So kind of you've got access to it now, but maybe at some point you won't, maybe you will, hopefully you will. But let's say you just downloaded a couple things. What are the key couple of use cases or performance measures or things that you really, really need or found really useful?
So this was the question was, what do we found to be most useful? What if we have some limited amount of time? What do we want to pull from the data? So I guess what we're still working on. I think part of the power of the tool and the exploration is there are questions that maybe we haven't even thought to ask because we got no way to get at it yet. And so I think the exploratory nature of that, and that's where we push a lot of the work we did initially with this was to respond to data and questions that the USCO had with this particular, with particularly ramp-to-ramp movements, and they continue to have some of those, is to really explore within the data and to say what are some questions that we really haven't, because we've never had access to this type of data before to even ask. I think so. I see two kind of diverging aspects for this. One is how can it help validate, calibrate, enhance what we do in terms of our modeling tools. And there's the other questions I think are more on the policy and on the decision makers, to provide a better understanding of the world with which they're making decisions. On that, I showed you the example of the diversion down Main Street. The mayor of Vancouver lives right on one of those main diversion routes, and she's always said, I feel like this is happening. But now she's like, I know this, we can see that this is happening, and these are the impacts they're making. And being able to bring to decision makers, either confirm their own mental models of how things are working, or maybe to say, no, that's more of a myth. I think they want to see data and representation of what they think. And I think those are some of the aspects we want to bring this to. I think if you go back to CRC, there was the bridge influence area. And that came out of just a base year model, like here's what this is. And I think this could come back and say, well, that was a model. Let's look at actually some observed data. What are trips using the I-5 bridge? How are they accessing the interstate system? Where are they leaving? Does that bridge influence area really stand up to observed data? And so I think there's that telling the story, and then there's more of the technical questions I think we have, and I think they're two different tracks we have to go down. I think one that we're looking at is with freight movement. The Port of Vancouver, they're on the other side of downtown Vancouver. Every freight truck has to move through downtown Vancouver to access the interstate system. So understanding their freight movement flows, not just from counts, but actually paths they're taking. We can look at freight diversion, potentially on non-freight routes. Those are things that I think are benefit to the port as well as the cities that are making those type of discussions.
Okay, I think we'll cap the questions unless anybody online has joined in remotely. Does anybody have a question? Otherwise, we'll move on to the. Is there a quick demo? Perhaps?
Yeah. And well, I can also show some of the features that we just generated.
So I think probably a good place to start would just be that the INR has some slide presentation from these new features, how they work and how they're used, and I think maybe then have Elliot move on.
I think.
And then if there's time, if you'll want to hang out and do a more online demo at the end of the meeting, I think that would be a way to go. Does that seem?
So yeah, I think that seems fair. Let's do a time check here and say let's get the next presenter up and going by 5 after 11.
Yeah.
So we'll give you 10 minutes.
Yeah.
To
completely fair.
To give us a demo here real quick.
Yeah. So what we did is, it was sort of a funny situation because right when slideshow from current slide.
Can you introduce yourself again?
Oh, sorry. Amar Bushes with Moonshadow Mobile. We're a mobility analytics database technology firm in Eugene, Oregon. So, this is automatically going. Oh my God. How do you turn that off? No idea. So,
use timing. There's a checkbox about.
There's a checkbox. An expert. Yeah. Oh, okay. There is an expert. So right when RTC placed the order, INRIX told us they were working on a new product. We weren't allowed to talk about it yet, but I did negotiate with INRIX that they would provide the data to, sorry Amanda, sorry Mark, that we provided the data with them on the new product, but we didn't tell them. So the new product works with line segments. So all the waypoints that you saw earlier are now snapped to the line segments, and all line segments that are skipped because there's no observation on that line segment are now included as well. And so what we started doing is to develop on the new product that we knew INRIX was working on, but we couldn't talk about it, but we could give them the data without telling them. So here's an example of the new functionality. So you click on an exit, an off-ramp or an on-ramp, you put it in your filter selection, and that becomes a filter. And so what we've got here is a couple of entrance, I-5 southbound entrance filters. We have a couple of exit filters as well. And so what the functionality that we created at Moonshadow, based on the feedback from DKS and Mark and others, is the ability to create a network. So what you see here is on the left-hand side, there are all the entrance filters, and the straight line in the middle is I-5, and then on the right-hand side are all the exit filters. So what we had to do manually before, you as a user can now do directly. And so you can specify these links. They're originally coming from OpenStreetMaps. That's the underlying geometry. And on the left-hand side, you see all the different entrance filters. They go to I-5, and then they go to exit filters. So basically, after you've defined this, you can apply the filter network. This is what I've done here. And then the freeway entrances and exits, they become selectors in the side panel. So you can basically click on an entrance and see what exits anybody from that entrance took. You can do that for the entire year, or you can do it for weekdays or evening peaks on Tuesday through Thursday, or whatever selection you want to do. And you can also combine that filter on a per vehicle weight class basis or whatever. The other thing that you can do is you can generate origin destination data from that. So what I did here is, you see on the left column, you see all the entrances, and these names and numbers are coming directly from how David Evans Associates and DKS define the entrances, how they define the exits, and then the third column gives you the unique counts and a percentage thereof. So the new technology that we were able to develop on top of the new product from INRIX allows you to work with road segments, build them as filters, and build networks based on them. You can also do the inverse, where you're saying, I want to see, what Mark was talking about earlier, who is taking an exit off of I-5 to avoid congestion on I-5 in the morning peak southbound, and goes through downtown Vancouver and then goes back into an entrance later on. So now the numbers that you see here aren't correct. I did this quickly, and I'm not a traffic engineer. So, but what you can see is you can then generate origin destination matrices from exit to entrance. And you can actually do it with all kinds of really sophisticated filters. So here's an example of data for New York that we did. Let me see where that is. That is, where is my slide set for New York? So here's data for New York. So again, this is the waypoints. So this is what you would see before the enhancement. You still have access to the waypoints. You can switch between waypoints and between road lines. So here you see the same data, but now represented as road lines, and it's colored by the trip unique counts. So yellow being the highest count, so the George Washington Bridge has the most traffic of all of this. And then so similar what I showed for I-5 southbound, you can define which, in this case, I looked at river crossing. This is the Hudson River. So I defined this as a link. That's the George Washington Bridge. This is the Lincoln Tunnel. And then the third one I did is the Holland Tunnel. And then the next thing that you can do is you define this network, and you load the network in the system. You apply those, in this case, Hudson Crossing Filter Network filters, and now you can look at how much traffic is going through which tunnel at which point in time. And then you can generate the origin destination information. And you can do this in combination. You can group the data by any other variable. So in this case, we're looking at the time of day, which crossing, which tunnel or bridge was used, and in which 15-minute bracket. Then the next step that you can do is you can connect these filters. So what I did here is, on the left-hand side, you have the Hudson River crossings, 3 of those. They go into Manhattan. And then on the right-hand side, you have the East River crossings that for traffic that continues to Queens or Brooklyn. Here I'm applying the filters, and then, now I'm generating the origin destination, the pathway data, which tunnel feeds into which bridge, at what point in time, for what type of vehicle. So that's a quick overview of the new functionality that we developed while Mark and Amanda were using this. So we just released this. So, okay. Yeah.
One question on, thank you, that's good.
The time of day, again, Mark kind of alluded to it earlier, but you're getting that by presumably a smartphone that's been sitting stagnant for a certain amount of time, and that's how you determine an origin and a destination.
So no, the time of day is really so the way that the INRIX data is created is they have deals directly with the car manufacturers, with the OEMs, and so they feed real-time data into the car navigation system, into the dashboard. They keep this data also. So if you drive from here to Vancouver, or you drive from here to Seattle, turn on your navigation system, it gives you an estimated time of arrival. It uses the current movement speeds of the vehicles ahead of you for your ETA. It uses your movement speed in the vehicle to estimate the time of arrival for the people behind you. It keeps this data. So when I say time of day, we work on a 1 second increment basis. So I'm literally saying within this 15-minute period, who was on this off-ramp. And I can do that. I can say, okay, evening peaks for the last 3 months, Tuesday through Thursday, show me the volume of the data, show me all the trips on this off-ramp and where they came to and went from. The other way around, but whatever. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, and that's different from the OD capturing?
No, it's the same. So every trip starts with an origin and gives it a timestamp, and then waypoint, 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 waypoint. Every waypoint has, of course, latitude, longitude, and a timestamp. And then the next product that we introduced here, they map it onto the OpenStreetMap road segments.
So I go to work and I stop by a coffee shop and I turn off my engine.
Yeah.
Went in, came out.
You got it. So the question is, if I stop at a coffee shop and I turn off the engine, so there's 2 rules that INRIX uses, and it's always so important when you look at these databases to understand how they were created. So when you look at fleet data for trucks, when they turn off the engine, it stops the trip because they regenerate a new ID. With a passenger vehicle, if you haven't moved, I think it's 200 meters in 10 minutes.
100 meters in 10 minutes.
100 meters in 10 minutes. Then, so if you get your coffee within 10 minutes, still the same trip. And this is really, it's an arbitrary decision, right? What is the definition of a trip? And you're entirely correct. And so there are ways to chain trips. The problem is those are often in violation of what the car manufacturers allow us to do with the data because of privacy concerns. There's a lot of stuff we can't do with the data because of privacy, right? There was I think you had a question earlier on, vehicle types and such. Well, they know the make and model. INRIX knows who the car manufacturer was, but they don't tell us for privacy reasons. So that's okay.
Great.
I think it's Elliot's turn.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So we need to get Elliot on this.
Elliot.
All right.
You were locked in.
Tripping over
You want to go here?
You might have to go through the
This is easy.
center row.
Okay.
Oh, you got it?
Oh, you got it.
Do that.
Want to go through me?
I am, yeah.
All right, okay. Request a presentation.
Yeah, let me.
Elliot, do you have slides, Elliot?
I do, yeah.
And I have slides in the demo that I'll toggle between, and I'll just run everything from my computer.
Thank you, Mark. That was very interesting, and thank you guys for Moonshadow. Very cool application of INRIX data. Our next presenter here is a colleague of mine at Metro. Let me just introduce him here quickly while he gets set up. Elliot Rose is Metro's technology specialist and works to ensure that automated vehicles, shared mobility, and other emerging transportation technologies support the Portland region's goals. So prior to joining Metro, Elliot worked as a consultant helping transportation agencies around the U.S. develop equity strategies, plan for emerging technologies, and develop data tools. Elliot holds a master's in city and regional planning from UC Berkeley. Welcome, Elliot.
Thanks, Kyle. I think we left out the most important part of my bio for the purpose of this group, which is that I'm not a modeler. even data scientist. I have managed several data tool-related projects, but I let smart folks like y'all typically speak to the details when I do that. So if questions come up that I can't answer, I may connect you with Chris Johnson, who's our modeling lead and couldn't be here today to follow up. And I appreciate all your patience. So I'm going to talk about our work with Replica, which is a synthetic data product. Thanks for clarifying that up front, Mark. I appreciate it. And this is it's a really interesting product for us, and it's somewhat of a new effort. So I'm just going to be talking about why we're pursuing it, what exactly it involves, and kind of where we're at in the process and the different opportunities we're seeing as we move forward. I also will give a brief demo of the tool that we can circle back to in a little more detail if we want to. But I'll try to just kind of breeze through the opening and leave brief an overview and leave plenty of time for questions. So, Replica, detailed simulation of travel patterns based on big data. I'm showing Replica's actual slide of how they presented on the screen here. The print is a little small. I'll go through some of the features in a little bit more detail, so please don't blow out your eyes trying to squint at the screen. But basically, Replica is, it's offered by, it's now its own company. It used to be offered by Sidewalk Labs. Both of those companies are owned by Alphabet, which is also Google's parent company. And what they do is they compile data from a lot of different sources, including the type of trip records that Mark and Imar were showing us, and they use those to build a simulation of travel in a region. It's very similar to the work that you all do in modelers, building a representation of travel in a region based off of people's travel surveys. The difference is that they're using a lot richer data to inform that to build that simulation, and as a result, the simulation is able to offer more detail than the travel models that we use typically do. It's a new product. We're one of several metro areas testing Replica. Their model is that the regional agency typically leads these tests, and multiple agencies in the region have access to it and offer feedback. So some of the projects that they're highlighting here in Kansas City, New York State, Chicago, and the Bay Area, they're talking about use cases here, and I can't really speak to the use cases of these regions, but I do know that Chris has been in touch an awful lot with his peers at some of these different agencies to understand how they structured their agreement with Replica, how they're structuring the testing process, so we can make sure that we learn from what other agencies are doing as they participate in this. So, Replica provides simulated data for a seasonal average travel week. We don't receive any of the input data that goes into creating Replica, and I think that's kind of that's a critical distinction here, is that we only receive the output of the simulation. We know that they build replica using cellular location data on people's travel patterns. They are using, I believe, credit reporting databases to attribute demographics to those travelers, and then potentially bring in other data sources as well. We are going to be reviewing the documentation and the methodology in detail as we get into the validation process. But we'll be hearing a lot about the nature of the data that they're using in the model, but not necessarily the sources, because they've been keeping the specific sources, whether the travel pattern data they use comes from IMRIX or Streetlight or some other vendor. That's something that they have been keeping trade secret. Some of the attributes we're seeing in this data, origins and destinations, mode of travel, purpose of the trip, home work location associated with that traveler, and demographic information that's most commonly used from the census, things like race, ethnicity, income, household car ownership. Most of the data we get is aggregated to our travel analysis zones, or to network links, depending on how you want to look at it. And temporally, it's aggregated by hour of the day and day of week. We're still figuring out exactly what type of temporal aggregation we would like to receive through this. We don't, as a regional agency, we don't look at, say, Wednesday at 1 a.m. a lot. We look at the weekday, we look at the weekday peak. And so we want to find the levels of temporal aggregation that are going to be most useful to us and our partners.
You probably want to click on the hide, because it's
thank you.
hiding part of your slide.
That's really distracting. I thought that was just for me. And this, the data will be viewable via a limited access web tool. You'll see when I show an example of that in just a minute that it does, there does offer the potential to download and export the data. And again, that's something we're working through in the testing process. Is exactly what data we want available through the web tool versus what we want available for download and to whom. So let me just actually shift over to showing it at this point, because I think it'll be a lot easier to visualize. It's kind of nice. It's kind of nice to look at. So I'm showing an example from the Kansas City build. Kansas City is the region that's farthest along in testing this. What we receive will look very similar to this. It won't look exactly like this, because the replica tool is customized for individual regions' needs. Kansas City does. I think it's safe to say they don't have the level of data that we're fortunate to have about their transportation system. And so, I think their tool is showing things at a little bit higher level than we might see them. But as an example of how we might use this, I'm showing here, so you see a summary of how many records I'm capturing. Replica, as I mentioned, is for a typical, I don't know if I covered this, it's for a typical week, a typical travel week in a season. So you can select your season, and you'll view data for the average travel week within that season. Here you can select the day. You can select your level of aggregation. I selected Saturday just kind of arbitrarily. And then, down the sidebar, you can also look at different layers and apply different filters. So I've already started kind of filtering this while I was setting up for this, just because since it's someone else's demo, it takes a little while. It takes a little while to run, especially if I'm on a guest wireless network. But you can see some of the attributes that are included in Kansas City's bill here. Now, what I've done is I've already applied 2 filters. I've selected this tract in downtown Kansas City as my destination, and I've picked trips for which transit is the primary mode. And what's telling me is on an average Saturday, we're seeing 1,800 trips by approximately 1,700 different people to that zone. Now, if I go in here and I toggle my trip origin layer on, I can see the block groups, a heat map of the block groups from which those trips originate. And then, if I wanted to turn on the network links as well, this is what takes a while to draw, but you can see Replica's estimates of the network links along which those transit trips are traveling. So you start to see the most heavily used, if I had more content, and I could overlay transit lines here, but you start to see through that, the most heavily used lines jumping out, as well as if I zoom out a little bit, you start to see places maybe that are further, you start to get some insights about places that are further from downtown where transit might be viable versus places where it's not as heavily used. Another thing that you can do with this is you can go look at, let's say I open up income here, and I see a histogram of the income of the people who are using transit to travel downtown. Definitely see concentrations in the lower ranges of the income spectrum. And if I were to click on any one of these bars, it would add that to my list of filters and further filter down. Just while I'm showing this up on the screen, any questions this is raising for you all about how this works or what's in the data?
So I assume that when they say income of a trip, they do it by like the census tract income average, or am I making sense?
So what they are doing is taking underlying data on household incomes and matching that to real cellular location data on people's trips. Then they're using that to build individual models of people's behavior. I forget how many different modeling bins that they have, but they're modeling behavior at the individual level based on slotting households into different demographic and locational categories. And then they're running all of those models and giving us that output. So it's the income that's been attributed through that modeling process. Yeah.
So Ellie, you say this is at a disaggregate level, individual agents as opposed to an aggregate exercise in terms of modeling or simulation.
Well, and we're still getting the aggregate output of it. Yeah, Tara.
So this is only household travel, no trucks, no visitors. It's driven by the people that live there and what they do.
Correct. Tara asked. For those of you on the phone, this is only household travel, not freight. That is correct. Right now, what they've said, what Replica has told us is that there are other agencies, I think particularly Chicago, that are interested in freight, and so they're working with them to figure out how they can explore that. And if they can integrate it into their model, then we might benefit. Over the time period when we're working with Replica, we might benefit from that upgrade.
And that's probably dependent on the data sources they're using?
Yeah, and the availability of ground truth data within any given region to kind of help them build that part of their model.
So then would there be any bikes or walking? I mean, you're looking at transit here.
Yep. And I think that's actually a good segue to get back to where I'm going with this and the stuff that excites us about this opportunity. I'd come back to the demo in a bit if folks are still curious. This raises more questions. But so the reasons why we're doing this is Metro. So compared to some of the other data sources that we've reviewed, Replica is more comprehensive. It's more modes. I think the modes represented are passenger vehicle, transit, bike, walk, and interestingly for the work that I do, on-demand trips, that's taxi, Uber, and Lyft. I think that's a really big topic of interest in the metro region, and Portland, the city of Portland collects that data through their regulations, but that data is very strictly controlled, and there's a limited number of people who have access to it that are all under NDA not to disclose it. And so for us, having access to regionally shareable synthetic data on taxis and TNCs so that we can help our partners make policy is one of the big reasons why I'm personally interested in this. But then that broader representation of active transportation is also really critical too, because that's a big issue in our region. We have pretty good bike data in some cases, pretty, okay ped data in some cases, but it definitely doesn't cover the whole region. And so being able to validate a simulation based on the data that we do have to the point where we might be able to trust it for other areas of the region is a really important part for us of like producing information that we can use to plan active transportation around the Portland region. REPCA is also more detailed in terms of having information on the demographics and trip purposes associated with the data. That's really critical for us. We have a lot of equity concerns in our region, and it's important for us to be able to understand not just what we're planning, what new transportation projects we're building, but who is going to benefit from those. And also it gives Chris and his team a lot more of the information that they need to kind of integrate this data into the modeling that they do. The data is also more frequently updated. We'll get quarterly updates over the course of the year that we use this. And particularly with my interest in in on-demand trips, that's a great example of why frequently updated data is important, because this is an area of the transportation world that's fast growing, and we don't really know anything about it. So being able to capture its growth over time, being able to use those quarterly updates to potentially explore the impact of the projects that we build over the course of the pilot, that's really interesting to us. The simulated approach to this REPCA simulated approach is a promising way to balance the type of detail that we're looking for to advance our knowledge of the region with the privacy concerns that are involved in working with location data. If you've been following the news on this, you know that there is increasing concern that people can be identified based on their movements. And there are all sorts of ways of dealing with that in the data, but particularly where we're interested in some demographic information about the individuals who are taking these trips so that we can understand better people's motivations for traveling, but we don't actually want information on individuals. The simulated data is a promising way to balance that. We need to test it, and that's one of the other things that was attractive to us about this model is that we have a pretty extensive testing process to validate this data for both accuracy and privacy. And if it doesn't pass that process, then we don't accept any data and no money changes hands. If it does, that's when our year-long access to the data updated quarterly begins. Finally, another big appeal was that the tool will be accessible to all of our agency partners. We've got an experience that we plan better when all of our partners in the region are looking at the same data. So I think Chris's,
Okay, on your planned testing procedure that you were just talking about, on whether you actually accept and pay for it, are you planning on doing a holdout sample with some of your observed data, or maybe you can just talk a little bit more about your testing?
Yeah, I'll get into that in just a second. Cool. Yeah, thank you. And your name, by the way?
Josie.
Josie, thanks for reminding me. So some of our use cases, I think Chris and his team are really interested in looking at whether this data can supplement the travel surveys that we use to build our model, such that we might be able to do, interim updates between our travel surveys, or maybe able to focus more heavily in our travel surveys on capturing populations that are underrepresented in a source like Replica and really get a more complete picture of how people travel using our model, or be able to update the model more frequently. Really interested, like I said, in understanding new modes like ride hailing, also dockless scooters, which we won't get in our first build of Replica, but which we're looking at working with the data that Portland has on dockless scooters to integrate them into the model in subsequent builds. For Metro, we have our mobility policy update, as well as our transportation funding measure. This tool could definitely be powerful in identifying projects and policies in those projects. But then, we also have to think about our partners' needs. TriMet is really interested in exploring what's driving changes in transit ridership using this data, changing patterns in who's using transit and where they're taking it. And both TriMet and the City of Portland, who are our funding partners in this, are interested in evaluating projects that they implement over the course of the pilot. So like Portland has some new north-south bikeways planned. If they implement those over the course of the pilot, can we use this data to actually see how those bikeways may have changed people's travel patterns? So, quick overview. Cost is around $450,000. It's $457,300. That's based on a per population point pricing model for a year data updated quarterly. Funding partners: Metro, Portland, and TriMet. All of Metro's local and transit agency partners, as well as our university partners in the region, will have access to data, and some of our partners in Clark County do too. The data does, even though Clark County is not part of our region, the data.
I think we're part of the region.
Well, it depends.
No,
Not part of our jurisdiction, but part of our region. So we definitely need to understand travel patterns to and from Clark County. And Mark, we're looking forward to working with you and understanding your use cases up north. So in the timeline we're on, we're currently, we have a contract in place. The next step is to finalize the acceptance criteria that will be added into the contract as an attachment once they're done. Those are things where we say we take the things that we can measure, and we specify the margin of error, the acceptable margin of error for replica for each criterion. So vehicle counts along this section of freeway must be within 5% of observed. That would be an example of something. There's also, we're also looking at a lot of qualitative criteria around reviewing their methodology, reviewing the privacy audits that they've had commissioned, potentially considering qualitative reviews for some of the data, some of the modes for which we don't have as good a quantitative data as well. In July, we'll be compiling the validation data and also developing the data handling guidelines for how we want to protect privacy and protect this replica data from disclosure. We're doing that in parallel because we're trying to balance both of those objectives through the testing process, right? If the data is not accurate enough, it doesn't really serve our use cases and we don't want to pay for it. If the data is too detailed, then it might be able to be used to identify someone. We don't want that either. We want to strike the sweet spot in between, so we're looking at both of those things simultaneously. And then we test and calibrate the data iteratively. We expect it'll take several iterations where Replica will give us a build, passes or fails 10 of our criteria. Hopefully the next time around it fails 5, and hopefully it keeps scaling down until they get it. If they don't demonstrate progressive improvement, that's when we'd start thinking about terminating the agreement.
So Elliot, do consultants have access to the tool, or only for projects they're doing, or?
We have the ability to make data available to consultants on projects, and I think it'd be up to the individual agencies to figure out how they want to do that for the projects that they're working on. Although we'll probably have some general guidelines around making sure that we understand who's being given access to this and what the use cases are, so that we can make sure the data is used responsibly. Josh?
In the pilot, are you going to do a project that's like something that you would do in terms of a planning effort, where you'll have a public outreach component? I'm curious on how, I've been in a number of planning processes where we're presenting results from our model, and you have skepticism about how the model works, and you can point to the documentation and all the work that we do, in estimating all the submodels. to say, like, this is how it works, like, the underlying methodologies. If Replica has trade secrets and we're not able to show that and talk about that in the same detail, I'm just curious on if part of the implementation pilot was also testing how we communicate those, the methodologies and the limits to our disclosure on the methods, how that might inform how you continue to roll out this platform.
Sure. So the mobility policy and the transportation funding measure that I mentioned both are projects that have a public outreach component. And I guess what I see, I would say that this is an opportunity to test a different approach to transparency and see what really matters to the public and to our stakeholders. Because from my perspective as a planner, sometimes the objections to the data that we hear are really driven by a genuine interest in the methodology. Sometimes they're political in nature, and sometimes, it's a lot of times actually, I think it's in between, and it's someone's own smell test for whether or not they trust the data. So what I'm curious about is, in this case, we have the ability to much more readily than we do with, we could give people our model outputs and they could work with, the folks on their end to visualize them and analyze them in the way that they'd like to. But it's not exactly easy for someone on the other end to take a look at the data in the way that they might want to understand it and come to their own determination about whether they just accept the results of this based on what they know in their community. And so you're bringing up a really good point about the limits of disclosure on the methodology, and I think it will be interesting to get into how we communicate that, because I certainly think there's an opportunity to explore that. At the same time, I got to recognize the opportunity in being able to make the data we're using in analysis available through an online tool that's pretty easy to explore, and seeing how that helps people's acceptance of the data too.
You think that would be something that would happen, that it would be open to the public?
Well, it will be open to staff at our partner agencies, selected staff at our partner agencies. That's often how we as a regional agency, because we're a stakeholder organization, hear about concerns. So I don't see in our contract us actually passing out logins to members people who are outside of our partner agencies. But at the very least, our partners will have some of the data that they can use to present to their communities and, get feedback on a more detailed level, because that's often what we're asking for, is our partners to relay our projects and collect feedback and come back to us. Anyway, all this timeline is approximate, but we hope around September to making a decision about acceptance. And then if we accept the data, we'll implement it from, roughly fall to fall, and think in the coming year about whether or not we want to continue this. So what opportunities are we really seeing to innovate through this? I'd say the first is, creating an approach for testing, better approach for testing new data sources. We're approached by a lot of vendors offering new data sources, and we have some pretty, we often have, as a regional agency, different needs than, a state DOT or like a major city. And the way we have of looking at those data sources right now has been, because we have to make a decision, all right, do we buy this or do we not? We make a thumbs up or thumbs down, and often because we're trying to manage risk and be responsible stewards, it's a thumbs down even when we think data is promising. So I think that understanding what a more iterative approach might look like, where we enter into an agreement, receive some data, validate it, do some due diligence before money changes hands, might be an option, might be an opportunity that if it works out well here, we'd want to pursue with other data sources and have a little bit more flexibility about being able to pursue new data. There's also a real opportunity to expand our policies and processes around data and privacy. Like any public agency, we do handle sensitive data, but in a lot of cases with the data that we handle, there's really clear policies and really clear risks around that. And this is a case where I'd say public concern over the use of location data and this type of travel data has really been growing a lot in the past year. We've had a lot of media interest in this, a lot more media interest than we've gotten in any other data project that I'm aware of. And also where, because we're trying something that we think is better for privacy, but we need to test it first, like the kind of policies around this type of data are a little less clear. So it's an opportunity also to think more proactively about how we address privacy in new projects. Also, a better opportunity to increase collaboration with our partners. I think we have talked a lot about data standardization in our region, but compiling all the ground truth data to actually do this and having our partners really engaged in that process is a good opportunity to actually put that into practice. And then finally, developing processes to validate someone else's model. This is where I'm going to come back to Josie's question. I don't want to get too far out ahead of my own knowledge on this, but my understanding is from Chris and his team, we're used to validating our own model, and we look at it both from outside and within when we're doing it. And this is a case where we're looking at someone else's model from outside and making a determination of whether to accept it. We do plan to withhold data when testing. I think, we're still figuring out exactly how we'll do this. I think in some cases, we might withhold a certain amount, a certain amount of, say, count locations. Not give over the complete set and, then see how the outputs match up for the count locations that we withheld. In other cases, though, where the data, there's some data that we're planning to use in the validation. Portland's data that they collect on taxis and ride-hailing is a great example. They have to keep that data in-house. They can use it in the validation process, but they can't share that data for their own, because of their own arrangements with those companies. And so that withholding is going to be more extensive. It varies a little bit based on the type of data. But we are going to be withholding data so that we can, test this responsibly.
So, Elliot, would it be interesting to compare INRIX's data with Replica's data?
Very. Yep. Yeah, I think we've had conversations with other data vendors about the potential to do that too. If you have INRIX data, sorry, I'm not repeating questions. I'm asked about whether there's opportunities to compare INRIX data with the Replica outputs. I think especially because you've been validating and working with that data and understanding it, that would be, yes, there is an opportunity to potentially do that, and we should talk. I should connect you with Chris so we can talk about that more. Yeah.
So you made a reference that you would validate to the TNC data, and you can't give it to them to build the synthesized model. Mm-hmm. So, there's a regulatory authority within City of Portland. So you're saying some people from that group are kind of on your team, and they will take the data and look at it and compare to things inside their black office or wherever that they can't, with firewalls all around it, and then say, yeah, it meets some things and not other kind of things? So actually, they're on your team, I guess is my point?
They're on our team, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And, I think that's what you mentioned is what we're trying to figure out right now, which is, in that case, how we document that if they tell us this data doesn't look good, how they document that in a way that, preserves the restrictions around the data that they need to maintain, but that also, gives Replica and the rest of our team too the information that we need to accept that decision and also, figure out where we need to improve the model.
Right, and if I could contrast that, my knowledge is pretty limited, but I think the TNC stuff is much more firewalls around it than, say, the scooter information. So do you see a day that maybe the scooters or the next mode to come along, you would actually, connect it right into this model? You know what I mean? As a feed?
I mean, I certainly think that a lot of public agencies learned a lot of lessons about the way that ride-hailing launched in our communities and about the need for good data to monitor new services, and they're carrying those lessons forward in documents and as when they contemplate whatever the next new option is. So that's I think there will be, with any other new option that launches, there's interest in having more robust data sharing requirements. Can be complicated politically, and there may be efforts to restrict the data that we collect. So we can't rely on that. But I think the scooters have been an interesting case to understand. All right, well, we have this data. What more could we learn about the scooters from this project? Because Portland can already look at, if you read Portland's scooter evaluation report, it's very thorough, and they supplemented the data they were getting with a user survey that gave them a picture of the demographics. What I think they're realizing the potential is here, if Replica can deliver on what they've been promising us, is the potential to have some of the demographic details through the simulation attributed to the scooter trips, so that they can have a better understanding of, geographically, scooter user demographics and scooter trip purposes. Currently, they just have that system-wide understanding. They don't have it broken out for different communities.
And then just to be clear, so you have TNC data in the replica model, and it's coming from not the Portland office, it's coming from where?
Are you going to show a Kansas City demo on the TNC stuff?
I can just flip over and use it as a mode. Thanks for the reminder.
The show, I think it's pretty interesting. The group, I'd like to see that. I wanted to do a quick time check too, Elliot. About 10 more minutes, I would say, for questions and answers. I think you're done with your slides.
That's right.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe a quick demo and.
Hey, I'll just pull this up. It'll take a little while for it to run.
Okay.
But then.
Yeah. And I saw your hand up. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
Tara, were you done with your line of questioning, or maybe you have more?
I think the last thing was what is the TNC source in replica? I mean, you don't know what it is, but it's not coming, there's not a pipe from Portland regulator into replica.
No, there's from Replica's published methodology, what it says is that they're using a cellular location data set and then developing ways to differentiate between different types of travel within this data set.
Maybe while this is loading, Ben, did you have a question?
Yeah, so having built large-scale simulation models like this around the country and gone through validation exercises, it's a complicated, big, extended exercise. I'm curious how transparent, participatory that will be. Will we be able to participate in that? Or is that done by certain people? How much public involvement will there be in the validation exercise?
So the three agencies that were involved in funding this are the ones that are leading the validation process. And because Metro is Metro and we pull data from a lot of partners, we're reaching out to some of the partners that we work with to collect additional data. So we are looking for ways to engage other partners, but I think ultimately the decision of whether or not to accept this model is going to come down to the agencies that have paid for it and whether they think it's a good use of their funds. Yeah, Jesse.
I would love to hear if your team has thought about how you think you'll use this tool to help with those projects you mentioned for the pilot that you're planning on using Sidewalk for. I only ask because I've worked on a lot of comprehensive transportation planning projects that try to use streetlight data or various things that are about today. Mm-hmm. And the plans are really about the future. So there was a struggle with figuring out how to actually integrate it into the project prioritization, for example. I'm not sure what projects you guys are looking at. Maybe you can talk about that.
I can't speak to it in too much detail right now because we've been sort of rolling this out in stages and knowing that, you know, we have these very high-level use cases that I showed, but I have not gone around and presented this yet to the people who are managing those projects in a ton of detail. That's something I'm going to do once we get to the point where we can reassure ourselves that we're on track to validating it. Because I don't want to waste people's time if we don't think that this data is actually going to meet our needs. So it's been a little bit iterative, but I think, you know, what we did do is, you know, engaged a lot of partners up front in this, generating the use case. I didn't really show that in the timeline, but when Replica, you know, initially came up and we were talking with them about whether to pursue this, that was something where we invited all of our partner agencies and did really generate use cases with them to the point where, I don't know, you know, I'm sure we'll run into the type of hiccups that you describe on some projects. I'm not sure about it, but I would be surprised if we didn't. At the same time, we have broad enough use cases for this data, you know, even among those, you know, Portland Metro and TriMet, to say nothing of the broader range of partners, that I feel pretty confident that, you know, we'll find a way to land it within some of those, you know, projects. And I think it'll be a matter of knowing which ones to focus our efforts on as we get into that validation process. All right.
Is this a good time for more questions, or were you going to?
I'm ready to take more. I'm trying to load. Is it
not coming up?
Yeah, and, you know, it may be actually because the amount of on-demand trips for this particular location is pretty small. I'm just going to reset. You know what I'll do is I'll just reset my filters, you know, and see if we can get.
Carol, are there any questions in the chat box that we can't see here?
There are not. No.
Okay. Any other questions? We'll open it up to Brian Dunn's group or other DKS folks maybe that are on the line. Now's a good chance to jump in. While we're waiting for some data to load, it seems.
We might.
I'll ask another question, Kyle.
You've already asked one.
So Kansas City, when they did their household travel survey, they had a task for comparing the replica results to the findings from the household travel survey. So like Elliot was doing there, like, you know, regional TNC mode shares or sub-area TNC mode shares or trip lane frequencies or all the things that, you know, travel models produce.
Yeah.
The travel survey that is coming isn't really lined up with this schedule for Replica.
Yeah.
Right? It would be cool if it was. And no issue. You know, I guess when you get there, you can validate it against the new survey and things. That would be really super useful data set, right?
Yeah, and, you know, in the meantime, I think there are other opportunities along those lines. We know that, for instance, you know, we're out in the field now doing some active transportation counts and some other vehicle counts, I believe. And let me know if I'm wrong about that.
No.
Yeah. And so, you know, at the very least, with new counts that come in, we can see how we might apply those to how we might test Replica in an ongoing way and refine it in an ongoing way down the line, because that's something where we do have the opportunity to integrate new ground truth data for each quarterly build if new stuff does become available.
Are you going to compare it to any passive data sets?
Any what data sets?
Passive data like NRIC or Streetlight, or is that in the plan?
Yeah, like I said, we're still working all this out, but I believe, I think we'll probably be following up with Mark and Imar about whether the data they have can be brought into the validation process. One thing that we have talked about is like whether the HERE data that's now available through FHWA for performance monitoring can be used as a validation set. Does that fall within the passive data sets you meant?
There's so many different data sets. The thing that's really nice about the travel survey is all those supply single type data sets like bite counts, right? They just represent one.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about the travel data is you're synthesizing travel diaries.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have all the complexity and joint distributions of age, income, location, mode, and so you might be able to hit some of the single targets fine, but when you look at actual patterns for people being generated and stuff, they don't make any sense.
Yeah.
And so that those more complex data sets are more expensive, but they provide so much more wealth of data and usefulness. And some of the passive data sets, the LBS data, starting to have more of that. But, it requires a lot of work to process those. And so it's just a comprehensive set of validation criteria and data sets that ultimately.
Yeah, and we haven't gotten too deep into discussions about that. If there are resources in our region that we could use in the validation process that have been, we'd certainly be interested in discussing those. I think the thing that we need to figure out is a couple things about integrating those other data sources. First, how much cleaning and imputation is being done with them. We don't want to compare a model output to another model output if we can avoid it. And I think a lot of the attribution, a lot of the completeness of those data sets might come from synthesis or estimation.
Yeah.
And also, on the flip side, again, maintaining privacy in the replica data is not just about working within the data itself, but also in being mindful of how we use replica in concert with other data sources. And so we need to look at that to make sure that if we overlay other forms of data with replica, especially as those forms of data potentially get more detailed, then we wouldn't link together information that could be used to identify people. Yeah, Josh.
Is anyone from ODA going to be involved in any of the validation stuff? You mentioned it's just the three partners, but I mean, as we're sitting here talking and Ben's bringing up these other data sources, and we've heard presentations from other data sources. I mean, I'm envisioning a future where, we're releasing an RFP, and we have acceptance criteria in that, and then vendors can give us back, some data that we can do the validation and see how it meets up, and then we'll buy it, as opposed to working with a single company in an iterative process like you're doing now with Replica. And so I think having somebody involved, and we need some guidance on this, obviously, and having people involved maybe from the DOT to help the DOT think about how they can come up with some of that guidance, I think could be helpful. Or maybe you're just going to document the heck out of all of this so we can just take that and help inform whatever we might come up with.
No, I think it's a great chance for you to connect with Chris as well, and talk a little bit more about what opportunities there might be. What I can tell you from the project manager side of this is just that I do believe that Region 1 is named as one of our partners in access to this data. All right, I did successfully, just to leave you with something here, I did successfully, although, there we go.
Okay.
Pull up.
2 minutes, and then we got to wrap it up here.
I know. I can just leave this pretty map on the screen and let everyone digest it. But this is just showing, TNC trips in Kansas City, not TNC, on demand. So that's taxi and TNC on your average Monday in the winter. And the heat map is showing the density of on-demand trip destinations within Kansas City.
So your dark,
So dark
gray,
yeah,
is an example of a track that
yeah.
has one of the higher TNC trip destinations.
So they're doing, it's interesting, they're doing density of trips, which I think, this is, looking at this might be one of the things we want to discuss about interface design, but this track shows up pretty dark because it's small when you look at density. Still, overall, you get, you do get some interesting insights out of this, I think, particularly around, like, which places outside your central business district are people really, taking TNCs frequently to. I think that's the type of insight that would be interesting for me. We know that people take these trips downtown and to the airport. That much we're sure about from our own surveys. But understanding how they connect other destinations within the region could be really useful for understanding where we might want to invest in, like, some sort of shared mobility program or better transit.
Great. Thank you, Elliot. Great presentation. Hopefully we'll have you back.
With all the answers.
Yes, in September 2020 or 2021 or something like that, with some findings for how we've used it and things that you can share. So either you or Chris. Maybe we'll put Chris on the spot because he's not here right now.
Yeah, get him.
We'll volunteer Chris. Okay, with the 5 minutes we have remaining, I just wanted to announce a couple of upcoming OMUG events. Before I announce the upcoming ones, let me say that we had a successful Modelers Night meeting at Shift during the Planning Applications Conference that's now been, is that 2 weeks ago? A week ago? Something like that? Anyways, very successful, well-attended event, so hopefully we can do something like that in the future as, conferences that pertain to our group come through the metro area. Let's see, upcoming events this fall, September 20th is a Vision Eval workshop at the TREC, Transportation and Communities Summit. That's the conference that's held up at PSU.
The conference is on the 19th and the workshops are on the 20th.
Okay. So I have a note here that says, looks like is it morning and afternoon?
It is. The morning is
okay.
sort of more broad for anyone that's applying it and using it. The afternoon is like, okay, you want to get under the hood and maybe you're a developer or an academic.
And again, this is for Vision Eval workshop.
What's the date of that?
September 20th.
And do you have to go to have a conference? Is it everyone's registration?
There is some fee to it, and I think it's disconnected. You can go to one or both days. Have to check their website on that.
In addition, this fall, September, October-ish, we'll have an emerging technologies panel, so CVAV discussion. We'll have speakers from Metro, Portland State, and the Oregon Modeling Steering Committee MPC group. And I believe that will be in a webinar-based format, kind of like what we're doing here as well. We can say with certainty, I think, that it will be a webinar-based, so you won't have to be there in person, but it'll be a panel discussion on connected vehicles and autonomous vehicles. I think that's it for the betterment of OMUG. Are there any other announcements with either people that are on the phone or in the meeting here that they'd like to make with regard to OMUG? Tara, maybe?
Yes.
Okay.
I think there is one more thing on the back, which is longer term.
Oh, I see it here. Yeah, I just turned the page. November, December, so this winter, OMSC Freight Subcommittee update. Okay, so it looks like freight research projects, data opportunities, and recommendations. This looks like an OMSC subcommittee update. So they'll be coming, is that a separate, that's not an OMUG meeting, that's a separate?
It's an OMUG like report out.
Okay.
Because we're just an arm of the OMSC, so we often report out on the subcommittee.
Okay, so we will have an OMUG meeting this winter that talks about freight and report outs there. Okay. Yeah, so look for those. There was a sign-up sheet that went around. I don't have that in front of me. Tara does. Okay, I'm assuming emails are on there.
Yes.
We'll scrub that list, and if you're not already on the OMUG user group, I guess, roster, you will be added to it for future meeting announcements. And so these meetings that I just kind of highlighted here, this fall and winter, you'll get announcement of those as well. So thanks everybody for coming. Thank you to Chi for hosting. We are in the market for other hosts as well. We do travel. This can be a traveling road show. I think as long as you have a meeting room that we can get web access to and have a projector available to us, we're certainly happy to take this on the road. And it doesn't necessarily have to be either at ODOT or Metro. I think DKS has held it in the past, so just FYI. Mark, maybe we could even come up to Vancouver. Something along those lines.
The river. Make sure it's in the mornings.
Yeah. We'll have to look over the moon shadow data as to which time of day we should be coming up there. But, yeah. So with that, we'll adjourn, and thanks everybody for coming.
Thanks to Carol.
And thank you, Carol. Yes.
We're just on a part of the region. Yeah.
I've heard a lot about you.
I knew you meant
Chris is really excited about the participation. I sent him a quick email about connecting with you about using the internet.
Hearing
Yeah. It does need to cover the entire region.
Elliot, is this yours?
Yes, it is. Washington County has really good.
Kyle, question. Hey, Kyle.
Yeah.
So,